Call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 85 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, September 26th, 2023, the committee is meeting to discuss Bill C-33, an act to amend the Customs Act, the Railway Safety Act, the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act of 1992, the Marine Transportation Security Act, the Canada Transportation Act, and the Canada Marine Act, and to make consequential amendments to another act. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Wish to inform committee members that all witnesses appearing virtually have been tested for sound quality for the benefit of our interpreters, and all of them have passed the test. Colleagues appearing before us today from 3:30 to 4:30 for the first half of our committee meeting, we have from Canadian National Railway Company, Mr. Eric Harvey, Senior Counsel. Welcome. We have from Canadian Pacific Kansas City, Mr. Nathan Cato, Assistant Vice President, Government Affairs. Welcome to you as well, sir. And we have from Railway Association of Canada, Mr. Marc Brazeau, President and Chief Executive Officer. Bienvenue. We will begin with opening remarks, and for that, I will turn the floor over to you, Mr. Harvey. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. CN thanks the committee for its invitation to appear today on Bill C-33, which is to introduce different legislative amendments with respect to the Rail Safety Act and the Maritime Safety Act. As an operator of railways from the Atlantic to the Pacific and down to the Gulf Coast in Mexico, we are very happy to be able to make some observations. Generally speaking, we encourage the government to demonstrate some reserve and not to intervene in transportation areas where it is unnecessary if there are no problems. There are interventions that can have a cumulative effect on the chain of supply. However, any legislative intervention should take into consideration investment in safety measures that will satisfy the legislative requirements and serve our clients well. With respect to the amendments on the Rail Safety Act, we understand the government's goal to provide greater rail safety. I'd like to point out that Canadian Railways have taken measures independently on their own over many years to establish protocols that prevent the type of event that could be very difficult. And so we look with favor on what you have proposed. I would also like to say that the terms security and safety should be independently rendered and defined in the bill, rather than as a single concept as is proposed in C-33. We also note the intention of Transport Canada to add prohibitions concerning alterations, damage, destruction, or dangerous, hazardous behavior. We want to be able to intervene if necessary.
Ports under its jurisdiction to manage their affairs on a commercial basis to maximize the efficiency of their operations and support the Canadian economy. We understand that C-33 will not change this guiding principle, and we appreciate that this is the case. There is no doubt that Canadian ports are critical infrastructures for our national supply chain. Their efficiency defines the throughput of that supply chain and goes directly to the bottom line of the Canadian economy. From our perspective, Canadian ports have delivered in a manner consistent with their mandate under the current structure. We support the provisions of the bill, which will declare port terminals to be to the general advantage of Canada. This will provide greater certainty respecting federal jurisdiction over these entities so that data can be collected and used to increase port efficiencies. To maximize the existing available capacity, better coordination between port terminal operators, port users, railways, and other supply chain participants through the exchange of real-time information is needed. This provision is a step in the right direction. Even though Bill C-33 does not deal with this question directly, we would like to comment on an important point for which there is a broad consensus: the need for investments in the Canadian supply chain. A recent report assessed that Canada needs in the next 50 years investments of $4.4 trillion in marine and transportation infrastructure to meet growth in population and in GDP. This conclusion is consistent with the consensus that there is an opportunity for all participants in the supply chain and various levels of governments to work together towards a collective goal. We have made suggestions to the government to put this option in motion, starting with fiscal measures which would encourage investments by all participants in the supply chain. We reiterate this imperative today. We believe that this measure would encourage grain terminals in Vancouver, for example, to prioritize infrastructure enabling the loading of grain ships in the rain, an operation currently not efficiently possible at our country's busiest port, but available just south of the border and which limits the capacity of the Canadian grain supply chain. Nous vous remercions et nous apprécions.
We thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak to the committee and are ready to answer any questions you may have. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Next.
Mr. Cato, I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the committee for the invitation to appear today regarding C-33. I am the Assistant Vice President, Government Affairs, Canada, for Canadian Pacific, Kansas City.
23, Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern combined to create the first and only Class 1 railway network uniting North America by seamlessly connecting Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The combined CPKC network allows us to offer safer, more reliable, and additional competitive options for shippers, particularly now with unrivaled access to North American ports. I will start with safety because at CPKC, everything starts with safety every day. La sécurité ferroviaire.
Safety is fundamental to anything we do.
Our legacy Canadian Pacific network once again led the North American rail industry in safety, achieving the lowest train accident frequency among all Class 1 railroads for the 17th consecutive year. And our safety performance continues to improve. Our 2022 train accident frequency is CP's lowest on record. We are also achieving a stronger safety performance relative to our industry peers. In 2013, 10 years ago, our legacy CP network had a train accident frequency rate that was approximately 29% below the Class 1 industry average across North America. In 2022, our legacy CP network was 69% below the Class 1 industry average. En 2022, le CP a...
In 2022, CP achieved 40% improvements for personal injury safety performance since 2016.
These safety results are driven by strong investment in people, processes, and technology. In fact, our capital investment over the past decade after inflation adjustment is approximately 50% higher than it was the decade previously. CPKC supports the railway industry's position that Parliament should amend Bill C-33 to include separate definitions for safety and security in the Railway Safety Act. As drafted, Bill C-33 would insert into the RSA a definition of safety that includes the concept of security. Safety and security are distinct concepts. Les programmes de sécurité.
Security programs are designed to prevent intentional acts by individuals seeking to do harm or damage. By necessity, measures implemented to address security risks are different than those for safety, and information about them is significantly more restricted to maintain their effectiveness.
Separate and distinct definitions for these two concepts in the RSA would be more clear, precise, and accurate. With respect to the amendments to the Canada Marine Act, we urge Parliament to amend Bill C-33 to require logistics and supply chain expertise for appointments to the boards of directors for Canada's port authorities. Canada's ports need to be more accountable to port users, including terminal operators, railways, and vessel lines. If maximizing throughput is the goal for Canada's supply chains, which it ought to be, then ports must be governed by boards that have deep experience and expertise with complex supply chain logistics. La structure de
The current structure of governance has permitted ports to be governed by boards of directors that often lack expertise in port management, freight transportation, and business.
Expertise often results in decisions that undermine the optimal, efficient management of freight through Canada's ports, which are critical elements of our supply chain infrastructure. An example is the inefficient use of port lands, which constrain the ability of ports to accommodate growing volumes of freight. Canada's supply chains need world-class ports. To achieve that goal, it is imperative that our ports operate in a way that optimizes and synchronizes maximum efficiency and throughput. Improving port performance ought to be an urgent priority. The Port of Vancouver was recently ranked number 347 out of 348 on the World Bank and S&P Global Market Intelligence's Container Port Performance Index. Bill C-33, as drafted, is a missed opportunity to make meaningful improvements to port governance in Canada. Canada has world-class logistics and supply chain expertise. It is regrettable that this legislation does not embrace that expertise by confirming its importance through governance reform. This is not a new concept for transportation in Canada. For example, many of Canada's airport authorities have bylaws that prescribe qualifications for appointments to their board. Similarly, NAV Canada's bylaws prescribe specific requirements that users be appointed to a minimum number of board positions. Parliament should seize the opportunity before it to improve the performance, efficiency, reliability, and throughput of Canada's ports by insisting that they be governed by boards of directors with deep supply chain expertise. Thank you. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Cato.
Thank you, Mr. Cato. Our next, Mr. Brazeau, you have the floor. 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee.
Railway and every railroader. Canadian railways are the safest in North America, among the safest in the world, and consistently getting safer. In 2022, the average Canadian Class 1 train accident rate was approximately 40% lower than the average U.S. Class 1 accident rate. Over the past decade, the Canadian Class 1 rate improved by over 20%. The Canadian rail sector's dangerous goods accident rate improved by 49.1%. While freight volumes increased over 10 years, the number of accidents decreased. Rail is the safest way to transport goods over land. Between 2009 and 2018, road accidents involving dangerous goods were 17 times more frequent than rail, and releases were 14 times more frequent in trucking. Canada's railways provide the highest safety performance in North America, industry-leading environmental innovation, and strong service, and they do it virtually at the lowest costs anywhere in the world. Canada's rail freight rates are the lowest on average among major market economies, 11% lower than the U.S., and in some cases, less than half the average rate of European freight railways. Canadian railways are providing exceptional value to Canadian importers and exporters. Railways are reliable links in complex supply chains. For example, the transit time for containerized consumer goods transported from Shanghai to Ontario and Quebec increased by 13.8 days, or 52%, during the pandemic from 2019 to 2022. 99% of this increase happened before the container had been loaded onto a rail car. Meanwhile, the transit time for Saskatchewan grain to reach Asian markets in 2022 was 1 day shorter than in 2019. Canada's railways were the biggest contributors to this reduction, despite the challenges of a global pandemic and public health restrictions. Les chemins de fer canadiens.
Canadian railways are environmentally friendly, and they are 4 or 5 times more economic in terms of fuel. Indeed, transporting a ton of freight over more than 220 kilometers can be done with a single liter of fuel. And so Canadian products enter the world market and their destination with this brand.
The rail sector is one of, if not the most, highly regulated in Canada. Any claim of railway self-regulation is simply and objectively false. Railways are regulated by the Canada Transportation Act, the Railway Safety Act, and the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act, among many others. Railways comply with thousands of safety laws, regulations, rules, and requirements. Under the Railway Safety Act alone, there are 22 sets of detailed prescriptive regulations that govern railway operations. One example is the Safety Management System Regulations, or SMS. An SMS is a regulated system of safety processes developed in consultation with labor representatives. SMS processes permeate every level of a railway company, every position, every function across the network. SMS regulations are an important additional layer of rail safety. Transport Canada routinely conducts comprehensive audits of these systems to verify compliance and evaluate their effectiveness. This culture of continuous improvement has helped produce undeniable safety enhancements. Canada's railways have invested more than $20 billion over the past decades back into the 43,000-kilometre Canadian rail network. These investments include innovative, safety-enhancing technologies like wayside detectors, track geometrics, and machine visioning. Railways use sensors and algorithms to predict and prevent equipment failure. Technology investments go hand in hand with training, awareness programs, and robust regulatory oversight. Through the TRAN program, the RAC and its members have provided world-class training at no cost to our community partners across Canada. We have trained over 28,000 first responders since 2000. Safety is a shared responsibility. Operation Lifesaver, funded by RAC and Transport Canada, works to reduce crossing and trespassing incidents and save lives. The Proximity Initiative, with its guidelines developed in partnership with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, helps to increase safety and avoid unnecessary conflicts arising from railway community proximity. Safety is a journey. It is not a destination. Railways will continue to put safety first 24/7, 365 days a year. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Brazo.
of questioning today with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 6 minutes, please.
Well, very much, Mr. to you witnessed.
Unfortunately, Mr. Strahl, I hate to cut you off, sir. The sound really isn't coming through very well. Could I ask that you perhaps turn your video feed off so that you're using less of your bandwidth, and hopefully we'll get some better sound out of that.
Sure. Why don't you go to Dan?
Okay.
Why don't you go to Mr. Muse? Yeah.
Okay, I will do that, Mr. Strahl, and I will start your time over. So, Mr. Muse, you have 6 minutes, and it starts now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that are here today for your testimony. We haven't had the perspective of the railways yet on our study of this bill, so that's helpful. Let me start with Mr. Cato, because you talked about you talked about port board's governance, and that's something that we've asked the ports and the Associated Ports as they were here, but interested to hear your perspective as a user of the ports. You talked about really how Bill C-33 is a missed opportunity that to be in, what our viewpoint is. I mean, when the minister's appointing the chair, and when there's as much prescription as to what that board needs to look like, and that's what we heard from the port authorities as well, that's an impediment. So maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Look, I think, the ranking of the Port of Vancouver recently, just back in June, as second last in the world, should be a wake-up call for Canada. We saw there were all sorts of reports of disruptions and throughout global supply chains through the pandemic. It's clear that Canadian supply chains need our ports to be world-class, operating at optimal efficiency so that our supply chains can get Canada's goods and resources to the world, and so that we can get essential goods to communities across the country. The only way that's going to happen, through when we talk about port governance, which is what Parliament seized with really through this bill, is ensuring that there's a very high level of expertise and experience on the boards of directors. The role of a board is to hold management accountable for results. And so you need to come at those questions in terms of holding management accountable from a perspective of expertise, really understanding what, it's not just supply chain expertise, it's also just expertise in the business world, that we need our ports to be operating at optimal efficiency on a commercial basis.
Thank you. And we had heard a different figure earlier about the Port of Vancouver being 368 that are 370. But I think the same point has been made that you've made, that our gateway to Asia is the bottom of the world. So were you part of the National Supply Chain, or was CP part of the National Supply Chain Task Force?
We met with the task force once or twice in this last summer, in the summer of 2022. So we were consulted on certain aspects of what the task force was looking at. There were many aspects that we were not consulted on. There were many subjects raised in the task force report that were never discussed with us or other railways.
So because Bill C-33 is purported to be a response to supply chain issues, which you've raised in your opening testimony as well as in the previous question, are there things that you found lacking from what you had the CP's interaction with the National Supply Chain Task Force, or even the Supply Chain Task Force report that from your read of it in Bill C-33? What's missing?
Well, I think, it's also important to go back several years prior to the Supply Chain Task Force report as well, because there was the Port Modernization Review that was launched by Minister Garneau more than 5 years ago. As I understand it, this legislation is in part an output of that process. There was also the Railway Safety Act review that was done in 2017, I believe. This is in part the government's response to that statutory review as well. So, I think this legislation represents a number of review processes, to be fair. But I think from our perspective, what's needed to improve supply chain efficiency in Canada, to improve performance of supply chains in Canada, is a regulatory framework that incentivizes investment. And one of the things that we saw that came out of the Supply Chain Task Force report was a recommendation on extended interswitching, for example. That policy, which Parliament has put into place just at the end of June, and it went into effect just a few weeks ago, is the exact opposite of what we need to improve investment in supply chain infrastructure in Canada.
So C-33 falls short in achieving that necessary objective after all these years of reviews. I mean, some of these reviews began 7 years ago.
There are some positive elements of the bill, to be sure, but I think overall we struggle to see how it's really going to make a material improvement to supply chain performance.
Okay, so no material improvement to supply chain performance. And let me ask about cost analysis, because we were surprised when the Transport Canada officials were before committee for the first meeting of the study of this legislation. We asked whether a cost analysis had been done for all the changes that were proposed, the committees, the regulation that had been added to ports, and the answer was no cost analysis had been done. We did hear from one of the port authorities that it could be $200,000 from their perspective on an annual basis, or to employees. Have you done a cost analysis from a railway perspective of what the changes in C-33 would impact you? And I'll probably ask the same question of Mr. Harvey as well.
Unfortunately, we only have 20 seconds, please.
Quick.
I would say the regulatory changes that will impact railways are not going to have a material cost impact for us, but I think those questions about the administrative burden for port authorities would be best addressed by them.
Thank you, Mr. Muse, and thank you, Mr. Cato. Next, prochainement, nous avons Madame Koutrakis. À vous la parole.
Madame Koutrakis, 6 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you, Chair, and very welcome to our friends who are here again with us. We are very happy to see you appearing before us.
Of Canada in 2021 released a report and noted that Transport Canada had increased the number of risk-based inspections, but, and I quote, did not assess the effectiveness of the railway's safety management systems. And Mr. Brazeau touched upon that a little bit in his testimony when he spoke about the SMS regulations. And I'm just wondering if I could hear from each of you your own perspectives. To what extent, if any, does Bill C-33 propose to address the effectiveness of railway safety management systems in identifying hazards and mitigating risks?
Thank you for your question. I'd like to start by saying that Transport Canada performs audits in the manner that the railways, implement their DSMS regulations and how they implement the processes mandated by DSMS regulations. So, although I don't want to comment specifically on what the Auditor General said at the time, what I can say as being involved with a railway and being exposed to the role and the monitoring of Transport Canada, that Transport Canada, in our view, performs their reviews and monitor our compliance in a significant way. In terms of improvements coming from C33, I would say that the decision or the proposal to include security will obviously broaden the scope of the review or the monitoring by Transport Canada to extend to that subject matter as well, in addition to safety, and that therefore, that should provide some visibility to the government about the work that railways and Canadian railways are already doing with numerous partners, be it CBSA, our own approach to security threats, et cetera, et cetera. So to some degree, that will provide that visibility that maybe is lacking now.
Mr. Brazeau, would you have something to add to that, or Mr. Cato?
The only thing I'll add is that, the SMS audits is an opportunity for continuous improvement. And it's an opportunity for continuous improvement through the audit to the inspection reports that are put forward by Transport Canada, but also the railway companies doing regular check-ins and making sure that their safety management systems are robust and meeting the needs of its employees and its customers. So I would say, continuous improvement is certainly an ongoing opportunity, and it's an opportunity that the railways take full advantage of as well.
Mr. Chair, I'll just add, safety management system audits, we are routinely and frequently audited by Transport Canada on not just the existence of an SMS. It's not just, checking a box, do you have an SMS or not? It's about how effective is your SMS at improving safety, at ensuring regulatory compliance, at drilling down into all aspects of safety within the organization at every level across the entire geography of the network. And the data speaks for itself. The data demonstrates that not just CPKC, but the entire rail industry in Canada is improving over time. We are seeing those results. SMS is part of that. A big part of it too is like I said in my remarks, very strong investment in people, processes, and technology. That's how we're unlocking safety benefits.
And because safety is number one, throughout our transportation grid, not just rail, but everywhere, do you feel, in your opinion, is safety and security being enhanced by Bill C-33? I know we already have a very robust regulations, system in place, but do you think that Bill C-33 enhances the security piece?
What it does on the security side is it, as Mr. Harvey mentioned, it does give, I think, the government more visibility into what we're doing. We've had security management systems in place for quite some time, since around 9/11, I believe. Shortly after 9/11 is when we brought into place security management systems. So that's something that we're doing. Security of the railway is critical every day. That's something we take very seriously. What this will do now is there'll be a statutory requirement to have that in place, so it will give Transport Canada more visibility into what's happening.
1 minute. Great. I get to ask one more question. In your opinion, and any one of you can answer this, does Bill C-33 do enough to address the environmental risks that are associated with rail and marine transportation?
20-second response, please.
We would have to get back to you on that, Mr. Trax.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Koutrakis. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barsa.
Next, Mr. Barsa-Duval, you have the floor, sir. Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses who are with us today. I would just like to echo the comments of one of my colleagues who spoke previously. We've heard a lot about ports, but not so much about railway under the terms of C-33. So that's why we're particularly happy to have you here today. Mr. Harvey, for you, from CN, I think a week ago or so, we heard people from the unions who were speaking about exemptions for the traditional security systems with humans, I mean, those safety systems with humans. And they mentioned that they would have liked to have seen these exceptions be made public rather than just being sent to Transport Canada. So, people have to understand what is happening with respect to safety and security, the ordinary person, and so that is why it should be made public, he felt. Well, thank you for your question. First of all, with respect to exemptions or exceptions, the use of new technology rather than the traditional eye inspection, visual inspection, this is something that is important. New technologies are exceptional in terms of improving rail safety. The reason why I say this is because at CN, we have proceeded with 2 tests with benefits to establish the benefit of temporary exemptions. That is with a car that is equipped with high-tech equipment and also the inspection of a rail corridor when that car was carrying out, transporting freight. And the second example, we opened up a portal in Winnipeg that essentially takes a photograph of the 4 sides, or shall I say the whole train integrally. And they use algorithms with AI that allow for the identification, very specific identification of an issue, whether it be small or large in nature, and it can be remedied very quickly. Well, thank you. I presume that this high-tech equipment certainly is going to be very useful and necessary for CN because you have to be on the leading edge of this type of thing. But with respect to the exemptions, would you be opposed to making it public to that? Are there issues here? Well, requests for exemptions or exceptions that are addressed to Transport Canada are documents that are not confidential under the terms of the legislation. But what I understand happens is this. There would be the opportunity for Transport Canada to consult with with the union. Say a union makes a request for an exemption like that. Transport Canada could consult with other groups. We don't object to that. Thank you. Another question for Mr. Brazo. Recently, over the years, and now we hear a great deal about emissions, about greenhouse gas emissions, and how their effect on the transportation of freight. Say, for example, in the trucking industry. Would you be able to, and would the railway industry be able to participate in improving the situation of GHGs by moving more freight by train? Absolutely. We have an agreement in place with Transport Canada where every year we bring forward our figures to them, and it's an agreement that is a voluntary one that has existed over decades. And what we have seen over decades is a drop in greenhouse gas emissions and their effects. So we do see the advantage to moving freight by train rather than by trucking it. We make this yearly report to Transport Canada. Well, with respect to the ports in this legislation, should there be plans set up, say, in the port industry, so that they would be able to better deal with GHGs and reduce them in that industry? We annually publish a report. It's our annual report, and we have our plan in terms of greenhouse gas effects, our plan for combating that. We deal with the efficiency and effectiveness with respect to the use of rail transportation. If you compare that to trucks, we also, there is a great deal more freight moved that way. And we at CN want to move more and to demonstrate the efficiency and effectiveness of freight transportation by rail. So we are introducing more efficient and effective locomotives and so on.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today to answer our questions. For years now, communities in northern BC have been asking questions about emergency response when it comes to major rail incidents like fires. They see the dramatic increase in the transport of dangerous goods by rail, and they want to know that their communities are protected. And I think many of them are surprised to learn that small volunteer fire departments that are funded through municipal property taxes are the first and in many ways only line of defense against industrial rail fires involving companies like yours, Mr. Harvey. You know, the community of Smithers, where I live, has a municipal budget of less than $10 million. CN, last time I checked, has a market capitalization of $95 billion. Does it seem fair to you that small communities are having to put up the cost of responding to industrial rail fires involving companies like yours?
Thank you for your question. I want to start by saying that under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act, railways have the duty to respond. In other words, it's our responsibility to answer to emergency situations. It's not the local communities. Now, what happens is that when there is an incident, there is coordination amongst all the resources available in an area. There's a unified command of those resources, and each party who is involved into that emergency response is asked to act in a manner consistent with their means. In other words, it's not for a small community having limited equipment to answer to a major emergency. Consistent with that obligation, CN has equipped the area, and I want to confirm it's accurate that there's some increase in volumes in your area of dangerous goods, and this has been the object of a safety assessment. We have taken specific measures to address this. We have hired a dangerous goods officer who's based in Prince George, where most of our equipment is located. We also have equipment in Prince Rupert. We're ready to answer and we're to coordinate for any emergencies that may happen in the area.
Mr. Harvey, Prince George and Prince Rupert are 8 hours apart. So there are communities in the middle that are 4 hours away from resources. There is no mandated maximum response time for those resources. And from what I can tell, it's unclear what those resources are that are going to travel by road 4 hours to get to an industrial rail fire in the middle, in the heart of our communities. So can you speak to the time it's going to take you to get those resources to our communities, whether it's Houston, whether it's Telkwa, whether it's Smithers? How long is it going to take, and what are your responders going to show up with? Because last time I checked, There is no CN Rail fire department that has trucks that are capable of addressing a major fire involving multiple cars of liquid propane that have caught on fire in the heart of our communities.
A couple of points. Our emergency response plans that we prepare under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act take into account the time needed to respond. Those plans are provided to Transport Canada and validated. Specifically on the equipment, and I would be glad to have maybe a separate discussion with you, meeting with your communities like we have.
We've been talking about this now for years and years, and we never get straight answers. I was at one meeting in Smithers where the fellow said that they were going to fly resources from Texas. It's absolutely baffling. And we have communities with volunteer fire departments where they struggle to recruit members. These members take time out of their lives to volunteer to protect their community, not to protect a multi-billion-dollar company that's shipping dangerous goods through their town. So I guess the question is really, what resources is CN Rail going to show up with, and how long are those resources going to take to arrive in Houston, in Burns Lake, in Fraser Lake, in Telkwa? How long?
We have resources that are consistent with our emergency response plans that were approved by Transport Canada. Over and above that, I want to say that in the last few years, we had 75 training sessions in your riding. We train nearly 900 responders.
These are voluntary training sessions, correct?
Yes, but we're basically training the people that you were saying may not be properly equipped.
But I guess what I'm pointing to is
our actions there, if I may finish, because I feel it's important, we're committed to working with communities. We realize that what we move can be dangerous, and we're committed to support those communities the best way we can. We're doing this in the structure and the framework provided by Transport Canada, and we consider that it's appropriate.
Yeah. I guess my point, Mr. Harvey, is that framework is broken, and Transport Canada and CN, I believe, have a responsibility to protect our communities, and they're failing to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Merci, Mr. Harvey. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, good to have you back. I'll turn the floor over to you, sir. You have 6 minutes.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. I just need that government to get me some reliable internet out here in Chilliwack, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask Mr. Cato, we've heard from witness testimony. One of the things that has been a concern in British Columbia is the use of anchorages and the time that ships are at anchor, and some of the sensitive areas in which they're not used to having those anchorages used, and now they're used all the time. And certainly it's the belief of those that don't particularly want those vessels to be anchored there, that they're waiting for grain shipments, that that it's an issue with getting grain loaded. Grain and coal, I think, were the two that they mentioned. The port also, I think, when we asked them about the delays at Anchorage, why are ships there so much longer than they used to be, they cited rail reliability. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that. Is the reason that the anchorages are full and that ships are coming in early and staying late because the railways are not providing the goods that they've promised to the port in a timely fashion?
Thank you very much for the question and the opportunity to respond. I think, when we look at grain in particular, one of the biggest challenges at the Port of Vancouver is this persistent problem of delays throughout our supply chain that are caused when loading of grain onto vessels by the grain terminal operators is interrupted or suspended during periods of inclement weather, when there's rain or snow, which of course, there's lots of, it's frequent that there's rain in Vancouver through the winter period, which tends to be, at the peak when grain demand is at its peak. So when there's a delay in any part of the grain supply chain like that, there will be cascading consequences through the entire system. So, for example, just the week before last, there were heavy rains in Vancouver over about a two-day period. We had approximately 650 loaded hopper cars full of grain that were delayed getting unloaded at 6 grain terminals because the terminals had suspended loading of grain onto vessels. So these kinds of delays that are, frankly, ports around the world have figured out how to keep grain loading happening uninterrupted, regardless of weather. Ports in just south of Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, have grain terminals that load grain throughout different inclement weather. This is a challenge that needs to be solved in Canada. Anything that interrupts the smooth, efficient, balanced, synchronized cycling of rail cars from the in-country elevator to the port and then back to origin, it's essentially a conveyor belt that the whole system is running. Anything that interrupts that smooth, efficient functioning is going to cause all sorts of consequences for the supply chain, and it's going to undermine the overall performance and throughput of Canada's grain export supply chain.
Thank you. Mr. Harvey, you mentioned infrastructure that could be built or brought to the Port of Vancouver to allow for grain to be loaded in the rain, or you mentioned that it should be a priority. Have you been part of any working groups with the Transport Canada and the port? And what is the solution in terms of infrastructure? How long would it take to build, and what would the cost be? 3 easy questions there for you.
Thank you. It's a request we've been making, I believe, for the last certainly 3 to 4 years. I believe it's in the port of Portland on the west coast of the U.S. where a terminal operator has essentially built a very large roof which covers ships where grain is loaded. And essentially that enables the loading, rain or shine, essentially. Now, in terms of time, I'm sorry, I cannot provide you a specific timing. Mind you that it is something that is certainly consistent with similar infrastructures that you have within ports, and therefore that's, given the footprint a port has, that should be a fairly straightforward thing to build, especially considering that it's been done somewhere else, so there's expertise available. On the cost...
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off there, Mr. Harvey. Mr. Strahl, your colleague, Mr. Muse, was kind enough to point out that he took the 6-minute slot and that you unfortunately received the 5-minute slot. Prochainement, je vais passer la parole à
Mr. Iaconu, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I will let my colleague begin.
Mr. Cato, I want to go a step further. I want to talk about vision. I want to talk about next steps. And as was mentioned earlier, we had established the Ports Modernization Review, the Supply Chain Task Force report, currently underway the St. Lawrence Seaway Review, C-33, C-52, amongst reports that have been completed or underway. And to date, we have those, but to update as well as to modernize. This committee has completed 2 interim studies on establishing a transportation logistics strategy. In 2015, David Emerson completed a CTA review, making numerous recommendations, as I'm sure you read. You speak about governance reforms within individual port structures to ensure they're establishing and adhering to their individual strategic plans. Governance that reflects supply chain's experience, as you mentioned, but equally as important, experiencing and working in partnership with communities, other partners that are part of the supply chain, to look at the bigger picture. So my question, with that said, do you feel there should exist a binational body that would work toward establishing a binational transportation strategy that strengthens a binationally integrated supply chain, operational and capital, moving away from protectionism, and of course with that, ensuring that the fracture between capital, transportation, and investments between both countries are not made, that they're actually done together, and more toward an integrated North American economy, in turn, strengthening our combined international trade performance?
Thank you very much for the question. We, now is the only Class 1 railway in North America that operates across not just 2 countries, but 3. We spend a lot of time thinking about this sort of thing and the need for regulatory harmonization, essentially, across North America. Minimizing any kind of trade barrier or regulatory barrier that causes delays at the border or somehow interrupts the efficient movement of freight. So I'd want to take that back and think about, the specific kind of structure that you have in mind there. But in general, we are certainly supportive of efforts that look at regulatory harmonization.
So in respect of time, let's do that offline. I'd really be interested in getting your participation within that structure.
Be
Mr.
delighted
Diacono?
to speak to you about that.
Microphone, please. Microphone, please. How can you evaluate the model for railway police in Canada? How can you contribute to possible improvements that would be made by so doing? For a point of clarification, what are you talking about? Are you talking about railway police and their contribution to governance under C-33? Yes. I'm going to delegate this answer to my colleagues because my colleagues have police operations come under their umbrella more directly. Thank you for your question. Essentially, the role of the railway police is to protect the property of the railway companies. And that approach, therefore, allows for a reduction in costs that would have to be assumed by the public. It's from the perspective of the general public that this is an advantage, really. That is to say that there is a police force, a railway police force that is there to protect property. Now, if I understand your question, are you talking about certain incidents upon which there were inquiries made? In 2017, the transportation, the responsibility for transportation in Canada was transferred to the Railway Safety Act. And therefore, there was also an agency for complaints that would be made, or if there was some type of untoward action that was demonstrated, something that wasn't normal under the circumstances. So it was dealt with in this way. For us, we feel that it's advantageous to have a railway police force, but we also want to see that there is, for matters of disciplinary issues, that possibility. Mr. Barcier-Duval, you have the floor. As I said earlier, Mr. Harvey, I'm going to go back to you. Perhaps it's not directly in line with C-33, but I do think it's in line with respect to clarity, and I have to get to you on this. A few years ago, I participated in a conference where the unions were speaking out against the transfer of workers from the Montreal area and in Quebec to the west of Canada. Some 50 of these were moved, and client services as well. So on 2 occasions, what they said was they were sent to a region where, and as you know, many people speak French and English in Montreal, but in the West, you'd have to look hard to find somebody who speaks French. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So does that pose any risk with respect to, shall we say, the quality of French on the one hand, but also given privatization, you are obliged to serve in French, but also to provide the services? Well, yes, thank you for your question. We are committed to certainly the province of Quebec, to Montreal, which is very clear. Recently, we've been subject to the Official Languages Act, the federal act, and we voluntarily agreed to comply with the Office de la langue française, so our employees in Montreal, Quebec would be able to benefit from that as well. I can state that over the course of the past year to today, there are more employees working in Montreal for CN than there were at the beginning of the year. There was a little bit of attrition, but essentially we've been able to hire in Montreal as well. Now, with respect to your specific question about transfers, those 50 employees who worked in customer service, no decision has been made with respect to that. The reports that were given were reports that were based on information that was given, but CN has not done anything yet. No decision has yet been taken. Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey and Mr. Bercier-Duval.
Off, we go to Mr. Bachrach for this panel. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Mr. Cato from CP. In the aftermath of the February 2019 incident that involving your railway that killed 3 railroaders, the Transportation Safety Board came out with a report, and among their recommendations was that the government expedite the implementation of automatic parking brakes. What percentage of the rail cars that your company operates have automated parking brakes today?
So thank you for the question. We are working with Transport Canada as part of a working group that was established by the department to look at the implementation of that.
Just a percentage. What percentage in Canada of your rail cars have automatic parking brakes?
The challenge with automatic parking brakes is that it's a technology that's still very much a prototype. It's not available at the moment for deploying across the fleets of rail cars. It is a prototype. We are working, like I say, with Transport Canada and with the industry on the implementation plan for the use of that technology. But at the moment, it is a prototype that is very much still in its infancy.
So are automated parking brakes being used in other jurisdictions?
They're being tested. They're being evaluated. But like I say, it's still a prototype technology.
In the Transportation Safety Board's own words, says new technologies for enhancing train brake performance are available to North American railways now. This was years ago that they made this recommendation. I'm just surprised that it hasn't been implemented. And turning to another quote from Kathy Fox, the chair, this came in the wake of the East Palestine train derailment in February of this year. She said, progress is being made, but it's very, very slow. I can't say something like Ohio couldn't happen here. And so here we have a recommendation from years ago that hasn't been implemented. Rail cars in Canada don't have automated parking brakes. And we have the Transportation Safety Board, which is the watchdog that's supposed to help us understand whether companies like yours are actually making railways safer and whether, the recommendations are being followed. And she's saying that the progress is too slow and that we could still have something like this major disaster happen here in Canada. I think this is all rather shocking, don't you?
15-second response, please.
I'll just mention that there is no governing body in North America that has approved automatic parking brakes. We're not aware of any regulatory body that has approved automatic parking brakes. Because of what Mr. Cato said, it's still in testing stage, and the tests have proven that it's unreliable to have automatic parking brakes installed on the locomotives so far.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Merci, Mr. Barrazo, Mr. Cato, et Mr. Harvey. That concludes the first half of our committee meeting today. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for their testimony. I'll suspend for 5 minutes as the audiovisual team sets up the next round of witnesses. Merci tout le monde. this meeting back to order. I would like to welcome our witnesses for the second round of testimony today. Mr. Bruce Campbell, Adjunct Professor, Faculty of Environment and Urban Change at York University. Welcome. And Mr. Rick McClellan, President of Genesee and Wyoming Canada, Inc. It's good to have you both here with us. We will start with our opening remarks, and for that I will turn it over to you, Mr. Campbell. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for inviting me. My focus is going to be on the Railway Safety Act and Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act. My research on rail safety began shortly after the Lac-Mégantic disaster on July 6, 2013, and culminating in my book that was published several years ago in both English and French. Voici le français. Though I don't have expertise in the technicalities of the legislation, hopefully my comments will help you assess where, if possible, the bill might be strengthened to help minimize accident risks. Firstly, as far as I can tell, the bill does not remove the power of railways to police themselves. Once again, Transport Canada is reviewing the issue. Also, the bill does not incorporate key recommendations of the Standing Committee's May 22nd report, including about railway policing. Nor do I see much substantive improvement in safety management systems. In its most recent 22 watch lists, the Transportation Safety Board noted that SMS, quote, still not effectively identifying hazards and mitigating risks in rail transportation. The watch list also found that some companies are still failing to conduct overall risk assessments in their safety management systems. The next TSB watch list won't be released until 2025. However, in an interview on the 10th anniversary of Mégantic last July, Kathy Fox, the chair, said, quote, a lot of steps have been taken to improve the rules requiring trains to develop safety management plans. However, the TSB is concerned about the adequacy of such plans as well as the effectiveness of oversight by Transport Canada. I'd also say that little has been done to lift the veil on corporate government interactions protected under commercial confidentiality rules. When compared internationally, Canada's access to information whistleblower protection laws rank pretty poorly. The latest watch list also concluded that unplanned or uncontrolled movement of rail equipment continued to create, quote, high-risk situations that may have catastrophic consequences. In that same interview I mentioned, Kathy Fox also said, the bottom line is uncontrolled movements, the underlying cause of Lac-Mégantic, are still an outstanding issue. And while some actions have been taken, we are not where we need to be because Transport Canada hasn't gone far enough. She continued, collisions and derailments on main tracks, which have the highest severity of rail accidents, were actually 25% higher in 2022 than the previous 10-year average. Transport Canada still has not mandated modern braking systems. The companies continue to push back against mandatory regulations on, for example, ECP brakes. In the wake of Lac-Mégantic, government mandated stronger tank cars for carrying dangerous goods and established a phase-out schedule of 2025. However, the DOT 111 cars carrying dangerous goods still run through Lac-Mégantic, according to local residents. In a recent interview, Ian Naish, former TSB Director of Railway Investigations, stated, evidence from derailments in recent years suggests if you have a derailment at a speed that's greater than 35 miles per hour, there is no guarantee these new tank cars will contain their products. Lac-Mégantic residents want to see train speeds reduce and limits on trains' length. Finally, companies have long resisted work-rest practices in accordance with the science. It remains an issue even after, I believe, new rules came into effect in May in a phased-in approach fully by the end of 2024. So fatigue also is on the TSP watch. It remains there. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell. Next, I'll turn over to Mr. McClellan. Mr. McClellan, the floor is yours for your opening remarks. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et les membres.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. I'm very happy to represent Genesee, Wyoming, Canada before you. It is a group of railway operations systems.
Railroaders operate 940 track miles and above all move more than 100,000 carloads a year. Short lines provide a vital first mile, last mile service that connect customers to the broader North American freight rail network via Class 1 railways, as well as remote communities and global markets. 20% of Canadian rail volume is handled one way or another by a short line. Short lines provide a safe, environmentally friendly, low-cost, reliable transportation option for Canadian businesses of all sizes. Genesee, Wyoming is recognized as an industry leader in safety excellence. We regularly participate and host tabletop, full training exercises alongside Transport Canada and first responders in the different communities in which we serve. We hold safety workshops, conduct internal audits, and support industry-wide safety programs. All our meetings start with safety as agenda item 1. Genesee, Wyoming invests in safety. These investments are non-negotiable, and a commitment to operating safely every day is a condition of employment for every one of our team members. Whether it's infrastructure upgrades, asset replacement, or award-winning training programs, Genesee, Wyoming, Canada is investing with the goal of achieving zero targets that you can find on each of our locomotives, our vehicles, and our equipment along our network. At Genesee, Wyoming, Canada, we will continue to build a strong safety record and culture that our customers, partners, and communities continue to rely on. Before getting to the substance of Bill C-33, I want to highlight for the committee the many changes confronting short lines in Canada. High fixed costs, aging infrastructure, commodity price volatility, and policy imbalances with other jurisdictions, among other transport modes, combined with taxes and expanding regulatory burden, are threatening the sustainability of short-line operations. Short-line revenues narrowly outpace their expenses. The average operating expense to revenue for a short-line railway is roughly 90%. A high operating ratio limits the ability to short-line railways to invest in enhanced and the capacity and fluidity of supply chains, especially because investments in safety are rightfully non-negotiable. Short lines compete directly with trucks and publicly funded highways for traffic while operating low-density lines than their Class 1 counterparts. Short lines need predictable, consistent government support and remain viable alternative to trucking. Despite significant support in the United States in the form of 45G, track maintenance tax credits, and various other programs, there is no dedication for federal funding or incentive for short-line railways in Canada. Instead, our tax systems disadvantage railways compared to trucks and Canadian railways compared to American railways. I urge this committee to note in its report that the federal government must do more to ensure the sustainability of our short lines. That brings me to Bill C-33. This committee should accept the recommendations put forward by the Railway Association of Canada with respect to the port governance and separating out safety and security definitions. We rely on the efficient functioning of Canadian ports, big and or small. Our Quebec-Gatineau Railway exclusively serves the Port of Trois-Rivières. The QJRY is a great example of the first mile, last mile benefits that short-line railways provide. The QJRY moves products from wind turbines to bulk solids to liquids. Our business is highly integrated and depended on by the Port of Trois-Rivières. The port's vision and leadership matter. So does the vision and leadership of the other Canadian ports we serve and all ports across Canada. Ports need leaders that have optional commercial qualification and experience. This group of experienced individuals should select the chair. We share the concern that has been raised at this committee about the time it takes for government to make appointments. That is another reason for the board to choose the chair. Our company manages several comprehensive safety and security management systems that are renewed and submitted to Transport Canada and are internally audited by ourselves for effectiveness as well as by Transport Canada. Je voudrais apporter ma voix.
I would like to concur with my colleagues earlier for the record that safety and security are different concepts. They should not be confused, and I thank you for your attention.
McClellan. We'll begin our line of questioning for the second round with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question's for Mr. McClellan. You mentioned you said that items including taxes were threatening short line railways viability. Can you speak a little bit more about that? What taxes in particular are you referring to there?
Well, we pay taxes like everyone else. And unfortunately, all of our capital investments, a portion of that goes to tax like everyone else. And hence the importance of why I brought up the tax credit opportunity that allows businesses as ourselves to invest more in their infrastructure and reduce the burden of having to pay excessive taxes.
You talked about a short line tax credit for railway maintenance in the United States. How does that work? Are the railway companies themselves, like the rail operators, performing those upgrades? And can you speak a little bit? Has that shown to increase safety on those portions of the track that have that short line tax credit? Could you maybe just talk a little bit about that credit and how it's working in the U.S.?
Sure. And by the way, thank you for the question. It's always important to give important information. So it's typically about a $3,500 tax credit per track mile is about what it equates to in U.S. dollar. So if you couple that with the CRISI grant and other options they have in the U.S., I think if you want to compare U.S. to Canada, it would relate to about a $20,000 tax credit per track mile in Canada. That tax credit has increased the amount of investment in the infrastructure, ties, rail, all those essentials. So it's a 47% increase and a 50% improvement on safety results. So we definitely see the benefits of investing more in our infrastructure.
Okay. You talked as well about your servicing. You mentioned Trois-Rivières. We've certainly heard concerns from the Port authorities and other witnesses that Bill C-33 seems to have a one-size-fits-all approach, that they're not taking into account the unique situation in the local markets. You know, for instance, you have the Port of Vancouver, which will be served by Class 1 railways almost exclusively. And as you said, Trois-Rivières, you're providing a key service there. How do you think Bill C-33 needs to be amended to ensure that those the unique features of each port authority are taken into account? And how would that benefit short-line railways if that was done?
Well, definitely, as reiterated by my colleagues here who passed before me in my comments in my earlier reading, I definitely feel that the experience and the direction of growth and opportunities that the ports require, having the experience and the knowledge to work alongside the stakeholders is important and key. And you bring up the example of Trois-Rivières. Trois-Rivières are working on several growth projects, including dock space, and those are all essential to them. But those were all realized because of the integrated experience that both of us working hand in hand that we get to, and the relationship that we have. I just feel like if you don't have that important relationship where everybody's working for the same objective, then you don't always get the same efficiency.
Right, and that brings me to my next point, which you mentioned as well. When the ports are working for a common objective and then they have the Minister appointing the board chair as opposed to someone who has been working with the board and has been elected by the board. Do you think that puts that sort of collaborative local approach at risk?
I think that nothing adds value more than somebody who's been there and done that. I see that in my life and my experience in the railway. I just think if you want to get the best bang for your buck and you want to be able to be as efficient as you can, having the experience plays an integral part in being successful.
Right. You mentioned as well the different modes of transport and the fact that short line railways take a number of trucks off the road. We've heard that with marine shipping as well, and up to 1,000 trucks off the road for every ship, for instance, that was impacted by the St. Lawrence Seaway strike. Can you spoke a bit about publicly funded roadways versus the railways that I assume you're talking about, private investment that has to keep those going. What model do you think should be used to for short line railways to bring about perhaps closer to an equitable situation between the two? Well,
I definitely think that there's opportunity for different types of programs out there, but I see the 45G opportunity as something where we're corporately investing into the infrastructure, and there's some form of relief through a tax credit that allows us to invest more in the infrastructure. I talked about earlier, margins of 90% operating ratio. I mean, that often leaves you with very little to work with when safety is number one, when you're trying to get a whole bunch of other little things that are important to your network for efficiency done when you're limited on the investment side.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl, and thank you, Mr. McClellan. Next, we'll go to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all of our witnesses that have presented today. We've heard, I guess, lots of talk and discussion around safety and security. So, Mr. Campbell, I'll ask you, first of all, we hear from the railway folks and other people that the suggestion to separate safety and security issue definitions for each sort of distinct. Would you agree with that approach? Is that the way to proceed?
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing research for my book, the security system, safety security system was not part of it. So I can't really speak to the security, except I would have, just off the top, I would ask questions about how security would limit public access. Both the standing committee and the general public and municipalities and so forth. So that would be one of my questions, but I can't say I'm knowledgeable about security systems. That would be my answer.
Thank you very much. Mr. McClellan, you referenced the viability for the short lines and sustainability, and you mentioned there was no dedicated funding for short lines, and that I guess you have to compete with everybody else in terms of funding that might be out there that's provided by government, like under the National Trade Corridor Fund or whatever. So it leaves you competing for a piece of the pie, I guess.
It does, but when I think of it, there are different arms of funding that our government does participate in, but their particular funding corridor, such as the NTCF funding, is built for a certain type of funding program, and other funding programs that deal with other types of requirements for the industry. But when it comes to regular track maintenance, things that that are important to our business and essential to our communities and the growth of our customers and things like that, there's not really particularly a dedicated arm for allowing for those types of opportunities. So definitely there's a need for funding. As I said in my initial response, I mean, we account for 20% of rail volume. We continue to grow year over year with our customers and providing them, the service and growth opportunities that they well need. So those funding arms are key and important for our success.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that for us.
Appreciate it.
The other point I wanted to make was Bill C-33 would amend the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act to establish a regime of administrative monetary policies or penalties, provide for fines, even the terms of imprisonment if failure to comply. So I'll ask you, Mr. Campbell, first, do you expect the proposed new regime of administrative monetary penalties to have a positive impact on compliance with the provisions of the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were first, my recollection was that they were first implemented in just post-Megantic and the regulatory changes. And so, again, in this, the amendments to Bill C-33, they, anything that implies a penalty for a violation, if you can determine and you have the ability to oversee and determine that there's been a violation, then of course those monetary penalties are helpful.
Thank you very much. Mr. McClelland, do you want to, from your perspective, from the railways, comment on that question?
I'll offer this comment, and I appreciate you allowing me that. I mean, penalties are penalties, and they're a result of something that took place. I'm more so inclined to focus my attention on the regulatory obligations and ensuring that my safety management system is meeting all the needs of the rail service that I provide. And I think due diligence and rigor process, lots of auditing and ensuring the policy fits right, and people understand it, and we know how to deal with it when it happens is more important than anything, because that avoids the accident from happening before it even starts.
The other thing I'll ask is, given that we're reviewing Bill C-33, of course, with the objective of making it a much better bill than currently exists, if you look at it from that perspective, would you have any specific suggestion, any particular part of the bill that you'd like to say strengthened or improved? Maybe Mr. Campbell and Mr. McClelland.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll simply say, as I think my colleagues have clearly stipulated, in terms of opportunity with self-governance and having the right people in the right place is a key element, and I spoke to that earlier. I think that's what the big opportunity for us, having the right people in the right place, is for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, and thank you, Mr. McClelland. Prochainement, on va aller avec.
Next, we're going to try once again with Madame Voyer-Villemer. We'll try your sound again. I'll give you the floor, and I thank you for your patience.
C'est mieux, hein?
Is the sound better? It does seem better. Thank you very much. I will take a few minutes to make a presentation. Thank you. I would have liked to have been there in person with you. It would have been an honor to be there. But I do want to make a few observations about the work I do with Oranos, about the structure, about the future. I am a PhD in science. I have a background in oceanography, and I have worked with the Department of Transportation in Quebec. I have submitted a brief with the clerk. You can find my comments in that. But I want to speak today to the climate changes that are occurring, the very deep, profound changes that are occurring in oceans. The fight against climate change requires a two-pronged strategy. First, the reduction of GHGs, but also the second, the possibility of adapting to inevitable change. And more precisely, with respect to adapting to change, there is a suite of measures that I have proposed that will deal with that adaptability. For example, to provide resilience, and also to strengthen that resilience, we have to have planning, preparation, and prevention that will be increasingly profitable in terms of facing up to climate change. With respect to transportation, the transport sector, we know that attempts are being made to reduce GHGs, but we also have to try to integrate growing climate risks, physical risks. Therefore, in the management of infrastructure, that has to be very transparent and well planned for. In the context of continuous evolution of our climate, we have to adopt an approach that will allow for our being able to adapt over time to the rhythm of change. That will allow us to be nimble, and we will require robust, strong research and development that will take into account the nature of the risk and deal with it in an enlightened way. We look at costs, of course, and benefits, but we also want to have solutions for that ability to adapt. Therefore, economic solutions that will have to be coordinated amongst the various levels of government, and the transportation sector is certainly a strong one. It is a resilient one, so it has every advantage to be setting the example for other sectors. I also make recommendations with respect to changes to the Maritime Act of Canada to provide for measures to adapt, to strengthen the relation between climate change and the response. There has to be two plans, in a sense, but a synergy between the two plans. We don't want to have something that is just restricted to GHGs. It has to be an overarching global approach. And the TCFD is very important, an agency that has provided for a number of measures that would allow us to adapt, to disclose physical risk, more emphasis on resilience of the structures themselves. We don't just want R&D in terms of short-term efficiencies. And there is another point. We want to have more direct seeking of efficiencies, but by insisting on what is being proposed by Natural Resources Canada in its platform for adaptation. We want also to see that knowledge that we glean in the future will be better used in terms of climate risk. The threshold for acceptability that would trigger change in a fair way. That means that there are certain factors that may well be more exposed than others, and they could be moved into a zone where they are sheltered from risk, but that has to be done simultaneously throughout the country. I'm afraid, Madam, that we have to stop that presentation right now. You can send us your comments by email and certainly answer questions. Mr. Bercier-Duval, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. And since we have our guest with us, my first question will be for you, Madame. We have had witnesses in the past who spoke about issues. I spoke earlier about the West and Vancouver. But I do know there are people that are very concerned about the anchorage of ships out distance from the ports. The reasons for the anchoring is that there was, they say, poor planning for transportation or long wait times that led to a forced stop in the loading. But that happens that in aquatic environments that can be very sensitive, there could be a disruption. I would like to hear you speak to the effects of this long-term anchoring while the ships wait on the aquatic environment. Well, yes, it is perhaps mitigated at times, but anchoring, long-term anchoring like that, does have an effect on the marine sounds. There is an effect on the species that are there. The ocean bottom is affected by it, and habitats, because of the sound effect, can be destroyed. But you would have to speak to biologists to have more precise information about this. But long-term anchoring like that does have an effect on the aquatic environment. With respect now to landscapes that could be affected by the presence of these ships, well, let me say we know that there have been prolonged anchorages in the Beauharnois area. And I would say that in long-term decision-making, the mobility and the temporary anchoring will have an effect on the quality of life of the inhabitants in the area as well. Thank you. We learned in the same session of our committee that some boats are being used in the West that are at anchor, are sometimes used to export coal that has been prohibited in American terminals. I'd like you to speak to that. With respect to the exporting of carbon. It can't be exported from American ports, but it's being done from Vancouver. Well, I'm not a specialist in international trade or the exporting of coal, but there are choices in terms of transportation that can be made. Electrification, for example. You can base transport on non-renewable sources. But there are choices that people have to make that are part of the economic chain that would provide for a more sustainable capacity for operating these physical infrastructures for the purpose of trade as well. Now, just let me come back to ships at anchor. Do you think that this can have a negative effect on mental health? I've heard people say that this is just a terrible humming noise during the night. They can't sleep. People are moving around constantly on the ships that are at anchor. Have you anything to say about that? Unfortunately, I haven't done any studies about that, about mental health for the residents that are exposed to that, but I have only dealt with the erosion of the shoreline. Well, perhaps the utilization of dikes would perhaps mitigate the situation. Do I have time left? Yes. Mr. Campbell, I'm very honored to have you with us today at our committee because I had the opportunity of reading your book. Very interesting. When you read the book, you really put it down once having read it, totally enraged about what is going on and what has gone on at Lac Mégantic. It has become part of our folklore. There were deaths related to that. Do you think that Bill C-33 is going to change the situation in terms of railway transportation and that dynamic that exists. What are you talking about? Are you talking about security?
My French, I get by, but you know, I think I mean the you know, the railways, since Lac Mégantic, there have been some changes, obviously. But have they been enough? Have they gone far enough? There have been lots of reports in the wake of Lac Mégantic which have shown that there remain improvements that should be made. And the Department of Transport keeps saying, yes, we're reviewing it, whether it's, you know, railway policing, for example. They say we're reviewing it, but it was a recommendation of your standing committee, and that was released last May. And
sorry, Mr. Campbell, I'm going to have to wrap it up. I don't want to cut you off.
Okay.
It's an important subject, but if you have 5 seconds, perhaps.
No.
Okay.
Go.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And next, we'll go to Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Campbell. It's good to see you back at committee. We've had a bit of a discussion already about safety management systems, and there are some minor changes in this bill before us that empowers the minister to require changes to safety management systems if they're found to be deficient. But there's a larger question around safety management systems because, as you've written several times, they've become the primary approach for ensuring the safety of our rail system. And have kind of taken over from more conventional rules and enforcement as a form of self-regulation. And one of the suggestions you've made is that safety management systems should be publicly transparent, that Canadians, that rail communities, that rail workers should be able to better understand the systems that are being relied on to ensure rail safety. Why do you think that's in the best interest of our country?
Well, I think public access generally is in the best interest. I mean, if it stays within Transport Canada or related agencies, then we don't know what's going on. And you know, listen, we've had almost from the beginning safety management systems. What, in 2001, 2002? There's been all, you know, there've been numerous reviews. The Auditor General has, you know, in 2021 said remains to be seen as SMS is just checking off regulatory boxes, not examining its effectiveness. Just before, the Environmental Commissioner in the Auditor General's office said, you know, the window is still open for a recurrence of Lac Mégantic. And, you know, the recommendations of the committee are pretty strong in terms of public access, community access, and I think, you know, we need to be, sometimes it sounds to me like another Groundhog Day because they keep coming back and they keep coming back. So let's resolve it once and for all and mandate, you know, good safety management systems that are accessible to the public, as the Transportation Safety Board has recommended, as the OAG has recommended.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And your comment about Groundhog Day, I think that I was thinking something similar earlier because we've had so many meetings at this committee where we have the rail companies come and talk about, in glowing terms, about their safety record, and then we hear from the watchdogs. We hear from the Auditor General, we hear from the Transportation Safety Board, and they share a very different story. The message that I hear, particularly from Kathy Fox and from the Transportation Safety Board, is that Canadians should continue to be very concerned because the progress has been far too slow in addressing the identified shortcomings of the rail safety system. Yeah. That the companies are not willing to make the investments that they need to make, and that the government, and I think this is the larger issue, that Transport Canada is not willing to stand up to them. It's interesting, I was speaking with a bureaucrat who's now in a different department, and he described the regulatory approach in different sectors. and said that, you know, when it comes to the air sector, the federal government has a pretty hands-on approach. They have good line of sight on what's going on. When it comes to the marine sector, they have a pretty strong regulatory approach. But when it comes to railroads, it does seem like these companies are bigger than the government, that the government doesn't have what it takes to actually regulate them in a way that protects the public from the things like we've seen in Lac-Mégantic, in Saskatchewan, of course, across the border in East Palestine. To what degree should Canadians still be concerned about the inadequacies and the lack of effective regulation in the rail sector?
Well, look, I think they should be, and I think, you know, the Auditor General most recently has said that they should be. So yeah, I mean, you know, an accident like Lac-Mégantic, you know, rarely happens. The odds are, but since Lac-Mégantic, I can list half a dozen or more of derailments and spills, and you know, so fortunately no one's died, but it could happen.
My last question is around private corporate rail police, and I think we heard earlier that the railroads making an argument for the continuation of private police forces that would investigate them, would investigate their parent company when things go wrong. And the argument they made is that, well, this way that the Canadian taxpayer doesn't have to pay for it. We pay for it, or they pay for it as corporations. Yeah. In the UK, the corporations still pay for it, but there's an accountable police force that reports to a civilian oversight body. Is that not the kind of system we should have here in Canada?
Absolutely. That's right. And I think, you know, and I'm sure that you're familiar with what happened with the field BC, and it's been reported on. The Fifth Estate did a story.
Horrifying.
And yeah, I mean, they were investigating themselves, and the person that they assigned to investigate wanted information, and they didn't give it to him, and he ended up resigning. And ultimately, I think you know, there was and the investigator from the Transportation Safety Board said, I think there's grounds for investigating the criminality involved here, and Canadian Pacific immediately.
RCMP investigation.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
But thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you in particular to Mr. McClellan, because we haven't had you know, the perspective of short lines yet on this study of this bill, and I was I noted your comment that that's 20% of Canadian volume. So obviously that's a significant piece that hasn't had any representation. I was also struck by your figure that 90% operating ratio, which is phenomenal, and so I guess, and I know the question's been asked, but some of the additional regulatory burdens are being added with Bill C-33. Does that concern you, given the tight ratio?
Well, there are some complications with when it comes to, you know, some of the negative impact versus, you know, some of the stacking of economic and labor agreements. When you talk about, you know, federal sick days versus, you know, days that we provide in our agreements, and those types of things, when they stack one upon the other, then it becomes incumbent on us to be able to have the support and the staff to be able to still supply and maintain the service. And what I feel is a little bit overwhelming is that we did not have an opportunity to provide our input, because we already had levers in our agreements that allowed for employees to take time off for necessary personal events and those kinds of stuff. So sometimes I think when we go about this, we think of the industry in general, but you don't think about the small players that play a very important part in the industry, and the difference that makes for us. A small thing for a larger business may mean something huge for someone smaller, and we're seeing some of the after effects of that.
And we heard the same thing from the ports, whereas We asked Transport Canada officials if a cost analysis had been done, and the answer was no. And the burden on a small port is significantly higher because they're also operating with leaner ratios and less capacity than larger ports. So thank you for that input. You talked about a policy imbalance, and obviously one of the things you've had a chance to talk a little bit about is the short line tax credit in the U.S. versus Canada. Are there other examples of maybe where that exists, or just overall other burdens that?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, having a large parcel of our network in the United States, we get to see all the funding arms that they typically have the ability to tap into, because we find that the states and the United States in general have a vested interest in rail service and rail service to customers, and we often feel that for us small players in the game, that's not often the case, that there is really a vested interest in the longevity of how we do business today and tomorrow, and how we help our customers grow their businesses within. So, I mean, I'm sure other countries, and I don't know specifically of any offhand, but I'm sure they have a vested interest in their transportation rail network and how important that is to the economy, because I think we make a huge difference.
So in that vein, we've heard from witnesses that Bill C-33 has no material impact at all on supply chains, that it's a missed opportunity, that nothing at all might have been preferable than the bill itself. How do you react to that? I mean, you've talked about the fact that having right people in the right place is probably more important than anything else. So is this just more burden and more red tape that's unnecessary? And
well, that, and keeping in mind the importance of our short line railways in Canada, we form a huge part and parcel of the integrity of the rail infrastructure as well as the economy. And I think some key players that we deal with, rail is the only option. If we go away, they close their business down. That affects communities, that affects taxes, that affects jobs, that affects a lot of people. So, I would appreciate with more of an open vision on the short line work and the opportunities that we provide in our country, and to have a better governmental perspective on how important we are and supporting us for the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I have to say to Mr. McClelland, short line railways are critical to the inter and multimodal networks across the country. If not for you folks, the main lines just wouldn't be able to handle it, nor do they even attach to a lot of the other ports, other methods of transportation that are contained within the ports, whether it be water, road, or air. So good on you folks for doing what you do. With that, I asked a question earlier, you might have heard it, to Mr. Cato with respect to capital investments in a binational manner. In your view, do you see the need to really integrate those capital investments when it comes to our multimodal networks, both in Canada and the States?
Absolutely, because lots of times when you get these types of projects or opportunities for growth, the rail aspect of it is often forgotten. We have the port infrastructure and all that work that goes into allowing more business through ports, be it dry goods or containers or whatever. Often we forget about the small rail piece that is an integral part of the operation. I could tell you that a majority of the Port of Trois-Rivières is rail served, and the customers have grown accustomed to the service that we provide. In their port expansions, they have lots of programs and opportunity to expand their footprint at the port. There's a rail component missing, and we'll do our best to be a part of that expansion program. But I think it's important that you look at both sides of the equation.
I think it goes without saying that to be successful at integrating binational supply chains, we have to begin by integrating our binational transportation infrastructure. Combined capital planning and the investments for same are critical. So again, just going a bit deeper, do you find that not only is it critical that the rail lines integrate that planning, but you also work with other methods of transportation, such as marine, air, and road?
Absolutely. We ourselves particularly don't necessarily deal with air, but we definitely deal with road. We definitely deal with ports and all the other modes of transportation. In some circumstances, even passenger trains. So, I mean, definitely it's a multimodal perspective, and I think hence the remarks that we've made, and particularly myself, the importance of having that regulator or that overseer of the port to have the vision of the entire picture as opposed to just one vision where you lack on opportunity and potentially you don't get the growth you're looking for.
So when you look at really becoming a pressure valve, for example, I'll give you an example. You know, in Niagara, we have Hamilton Niagara. We have a trade corridor that's been created between the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority and Niagara in general along the Welland Canal corridor. And we see sometimes needed a pressure valve for Monroe and even sometimes Pearson. And the smaller airports, the Niagara District Airport as well as the Rungling Airport in Niagara, can act as that pressure valve. They have short line right next to them. They have the canal right there. They have road, which obviously goes to the international bridges. Do you see your short line operation really playing a bigger part in that, especially with the proper capital investments?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, some of the services that we provide because, you know, we look for capacity is, you know, when you look at ports, you look at customers that are receiving inbound and outbound traffic. Sometimes there are periods where you have too much traffic, too much to deal with. So we like to provide alternatives to our stakeholders, storage opportunities just outside that, you know, not too far away where
More
we're able
logistics
to,
related.
yeah, where we're able to give them as they need. I mean, that's the type of service we've been providing to the Port of Trois-Rivières. It's more like a hand-to-mouth because everybody's needs are different. Sometimes customers are having a hard time, you know, going through the bunching of their product or what have you, and they need an alternative. We provide that alternative, and sometimes that alternative requires investment. And so that's where we would probably look at.
And do you find, Mr. McClellan, yourself working within that, integrating that logistics and distribution with all methods of transportation?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. And nous avons prochainement Mr.
Mr. Barcelot, Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Madame Ursule Villemer, I have a question for you. In C-33, much mention is made about climate change and having a plan to deal with it, a plan for reducing GHGs. In your opinion, is that responsibility one that is to be assumed only by the ports, or should that be borne by the entire marine industry? Well, yes, there has to be coordination in achieving these plans. The goal of adapting has to be considered not just in terms of the sector, but across the territory. There has to be a regional approach for adapting to change, as that has been promoted by Natural Resources Canada. I mentioned it earlier. Thank you. I have to interrupt you. I don't have a lot of time. I'll ask my question, my last one, to Mr. Campbell. Earlier today, I spoke about some exceptions, even secret exceptions that are made for certain companies. They have been divulged and disclosed by certain unions. They want to have that information made public by Transport Canada. To your mind, from an external point of view, sometimes there are security exceptions that are made that are secret, but do you think it's normal to have everything published publicly?
I think there's room to expand what's accessible to the larger public. I mean, I look at the recommendations of this committee, the standing committee. It is 30-something recommendations, and amongst them are recommendations for greater transparency. And so I ask you to judge whether the amendments that Transport Canada has put into this legislation are sufficient to meet the recommendations of the committee. Look, for fatigue management, for example, do they meet the requests of the standing committee? I mean, there's been lots of back and forth between the companies and the yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. We appreciate your enthusiasm, and you can send us an email with any future thoughts that you would like to share with us. We'll include that as your testimony. Thank you, sir.
I do have some.
Perfect. Mr. Bachrach, you will be clearing the bases for us, to use a good Montreal Expos term. So the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask my last question to Madame Boyer-Villemer. I hope I pronounced that approximately close. And as I think she's aware, this bill in front of us includes provisions that would require ports to publish 5-year climate plans. And my observation is that there are a lot of corporate climate plans out there that are essentially a collection of activities but don't have enough rigor. They're not robust enough to actually hold those entities accountable for driving down emissions and contributing to the national ambitions around climate action. What characteristics does she believe must be included in those climate plans to ensure that they're worth the paper that they're written on?
Well, the first part of my answer is that the plan, as soon as it is released, is already behind in terms of the actions that are required. The knowledge evolves very rapidly in terms of risks. So I think the process of doing the plan will gather the most impact in terms of how people collaborate to reach those objectives, and that's what's going to make people more accountable. I think if you regulate more the process rather than the output of it, then you make sure that people are at the table and are conscious that the choices that they make have consequences, and consequences on the security and the well-being of the populations. So yes, the plan is there. It's a 5-year horizon. However, we have to plan much more ahead in terms of climate change and long-term life of that kind of infrastructure. So I don't have a magic key or process that could make sure that people are accountable, rather than saying that one has to focus also on the process rather than only the output.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr.
Merci
Chair.
beaucoup. Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Merci, Madame Boyer-Villemer.
Thank you, Madame Boyer-Villemer. Thank you, Mr. Campbell, and thank you, Mr. Killen. It was really a pleasure to hear you today.
And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Have a great night, everyone.